Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Unnatural Selection, which is episode 7 of season 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the episode Unnatural Selection. So Unnatural Selection is when the Enterprise encounters a ship where the entire crew is dead. They appear to have died from old age, even though none of them are up there in age. And so they realize that something must have happened. They quarantine the ship. They go to the outpost, the last outpost that the ship visited, which was the scientific research on genetically engineering human beings, which they call their children. And everyone at the outpost is suffering from the same disease that is causing them to age at a rapid rate. However, they insist that their genetically engineered children are safe and plead with Pulaski to save them and take them away from the place so they aren't left alone after everyone on the outpost dies. But Picard thinks it's too risky and doesn't want to risk spreading the infection, so Pulaski volunteers to go on a shuttlecraft by herself with Data in order to beam the child aboard and test to make sure that they are not in fact contagious, but they discover that they are in fact contagious, and Pulaski also gets the disease, so she goes back to the outpost where she plans to die of the disease with everyone else. And there they discovered that the disease was in fact caused by the children because they have an immune system that goes outside of themselves and attacks viruses. And when they were introduced to a foreign virus by one of the officers aboard the transport ship, when the immune system attacked the virus, it mutated and spread it to this kind of disease that causes everyone to age rapidly. So Picard, not willing to let Pulaski die, asks for ways to get around this to save her life, and O'Brien, Chief Miles O'Brien, comes up with an ingenious transporter solution using a strand of her DNA to beam her up and align with her DNA before she was infected in order to erase the disease. And they used the same method to cure everyone else of the disease and then go on their merry way. So this episode was compared a lot to The Deadly Years in the original series, and for very obvious reasons, because that episode also was about a virus that caused people to age rapidly. However, those who state that this is kind of another sort of ripoff or another sort of reimagining, much in the same way that The Naked Now was for The Naked Time, I solely disagree with that assessment. I think that I would call that inaccurate, because even though the basic baseline concept is the same, there's a disease that causes people to age rapidly, but that is where the similarities of the two episodes end. Like, nothing else with The Deadly Years has anything to do with anything else in Unnatural Selection. And so therefore, I'm not going to deny that the two episodes are similar and they have the same basic similar premise or threat. But other than that, these are two entirely different episodes. Even the details around the disease in The Deadly Years was different. It was caused by something totally different. It infected 6 main cast members, or 5, how many it was. And then the main episode was about this Commodore trying to take over the ship from Kirk, who he deemed to be unfit to command. In fact, held a trial about it, and then the Commodore almost got the Enterprise destroyed because he's incompetent. And so they had to find a cure in time to save the Enterprise from this incompetent Commodore. And that's a totally different plot line than in this episode, where this episode it only infects one of the main characters, and is about a group of genetically engineered children, and how these crazy scientists think that the children are perfect and can't cause any harm, and they're beautiful, and yet they're the ones who caused the disease in the first place. And then Pulaski becomes trapped on the planet, and everyone thinks she's going to die, but Picard just gained his new respect for her and found out that she really wanted to be on the ship, and so he goes out of her way to use the transporter as a magic device in order to save her life. Now, so those two premises in 2 episodes are entirely different. Nothing to do with each other. The only similarity is there's a disease that causes people to grow old very fast, and that's just a high concept. There's a lot of, I talked about this, and there's a lot of these in the animated series as well, because they tend to be more sort of stuff they do in cartoons, but they also do it in sci-fi. There's these high concept episodes like the crew grows old, the crew grows young, the crew gets smaller. Well, they did that in Deep Space Nine too. The crew, what else does the crew? I don't know. Like the main characters get trapped in an alien zoo, or they grow old, they move backwards in time, they grow young. Like, yeah, these high concept episodes, they get drunk from a virus. Like these kind of high concept episodes. Grows Young happened in TNG as well. Don't get me started on that. But anyway, point is, it's just the high concept is similar to one used in the original series, but that's it. This episode is nowhere near comparison to how The Naked Now is to Naked Time, because The Naked Now was beat for beat copying The Naked Time. So that was at best an homage to it, but really just a rip-off of it. And so, yeah, no, definitely wouldn't compare. And I think Enterprise, ripped off, 5 different previous Star Trek episodes, way more than this episode does with Unnatural Selection. So, anywho, or with Deadly Years. There's one thing I want to start with, because this is the thing that really has been bugging me, and I didn't really notice this before the previous times I watched this episode, because I think it particularly has to do with Strange New Worlds, because Strange New Worlds made it really front and center how prejudiced Starfleet and the Federation is to genetically engineering, and how it's absolutely out loud banned anyone who participated in it or was a product of it is ostracized, considered an outcast, outlaw, and this is said to be because of the result of the eugenics war involving Khan, which who knows when the fuck took place, because that keeps changing in canon, but that's beside the point. The point is, so the Starfleet and Federation is very, very biased, and they have laws against this. They're illegal, and not only that, but those who have it or participate in the other alien species that participates in it as seen or ostracized and seen as no good to the Federation, and and it's seen as particularly in Strange New Worlds, made it clear that it's a character flaw that Starfleet is in fact bigoted towards this, even when there's nothing wrong with doing it. Now, this was kind of first brought up in, I believe, Deep Space Nine. If you correct me if I'm wrong, it might have been mentioned before Deep Space Nine, but my earliest memory of it is the episode Dr. Bashir, I presume, when they did one of the worst retcons in Star Trek ever, and revealed that Bashir was genetically enhanced since a child, which is illegal, and his parents went to prison for it, and he was worried that he would lose his Starfleet commission because of it, but Starfleet, because of all the good that Bashir did between now and then, they allowed him to stay in Starfleet, but the consequence was that his father had to go to prison because he was the one that ordered the genetic enhancements. And then we meet some genetically enhanced misfits in later seasons of Deep Space Nine as well. But in that particular episode, the Admiral gave this huge speech about how wrong genetically engineering was because of Khan and how they have to avoid it. And then, of course, Strange New Worlds kind of turned this on its head and just saw it as Starfleet being overly prejudiced, where there's a group of aliens who genetically enhance but actually do nothing wrong, and they're not becoming bloodthirsty, or they don't want to create superior life forms. They just do it to live in certain places. They do it because it's necessary, and they're very benevolent about it. Yet Starfleet is very bigoted towards them and persecutes them just for being different. Which, we're keeping track of my TNG reviews, Roddenberry would be wholeheartedly against that whole thing, because Starfleet should not be bigoted. But anyway, that goes against the perfect future. But anywho, and obviously this episode was written and made before any of that was established. Way long before. But it's weird going back in retrospect and watching this episode to see that there's a whole scientific station based on genetic engineering, and they are genetically engineering these human beings to be superior. They're engineering them to be telepathic. They can communicate telepathically. They communicate even with non-telepaths like Pulaski. They're telekinetic. They can move shit with their mind, and their immune systems are so aggressive that they attack viruses just for being in the same room as them. Now, I've heard scientists really trash that and discount that as being illogical and very unscientific in the realm of fantasy, which fair enough. But the point is, they really are genetically engineering. It's not just the slight genetic engineering. It's not even like Bashir, where they just made him very fast and smart and with his calculations. They're making them superhuman, telepathic, telekinetic, super immune systems, and so it's hard watching this episode in retrospect because there's no way in hell the Starfleet or the Federation would be the least bit okay with this. These people would be outlawed. These people should be outcast. And as much as I think Strange New Worlds made a good case of why Starfleet was being bigoted and why they were being bigoted towards people with genetic enhancements, I would actually be on the side of Starfleet in this one. In this case, I think these people are going a bit too far. The scientist in this episode comes off as way too power hungry and oh, my children are superior in every way. You gotta save the children. The only thing that's important, I want all of humanity to be like this, with super telekinetic powers and can read people's thoughts. Now, these children were seen as very, benevolent and kind, and not portrayed like Gary Mitchell or anything like that. In fact, they were portrayed as very empathetic and super kind and kind of naive. Really, the children aspect of it came through, but just because they're like that doesn't mean that they're all going to be like that, especially if they start to create a majority of them that want to take over the human race and want to take over the Federation. I think it's a grave concern, and I would actually be on the anti-genetically engineering side of this argument, and especially the mad way the scientist was behaving in this episode. They're superior, they're awesome, they're going to be the new human race, and I'd be you deserve to go to prison. At the very least, censured for trying to run these crazy experiments. So, yeah. I would not be on Una's side on this particular case. The case with the Illyrians and, Strange New Worlds, obviously I'm on their side, because they're not mad like this scientist clearly is, and they're just doing very reasonable genetic enhancements that are not, meant to be sort of power hungry and make human beings obsolete. But anyway, so So that's just, it just makes it weird. Intellectually, I know that they wrote this episode way before they came up with the storyline. Even though this is way after Khan, it still didn't come up with the whole Federation banning genetically enhanced thing until Deep Space Nine. I don't think, anyway. Oh, we get another actually episode about genetic enhancement in TNG. So yeah, I think it wasn't until Deep Space Nine that they introduced it. We get the Masterpiece Society all the way in season 5, which I'll get to that when I get to that. Anyway, so this episode's about Pulaski, and it's the first Pulaski episode. And yeah, I don't like her. I still don't like her. I heard some people say that she was being nicer to Data in this episode. She was not. I don't know what they're talking about. She was being just as rude to Data as she always was. Like, she was, sort of making fun of him. Like, all right, she wanted to go in the shuttle with the kid. And she didn't, go to Picard. This is just weird to me. Like, Picard should have ordered, okay, you can have the shuttle, I'll have Data fly it for you, and blah, blah. But instead, Pulaski just called Data to the shuttle bay, and he's like, what am I doing here? And she's like, oh, you can fly one of these, right? You have the training for it? He's a fucking Lieutenant Commander, second officer of the ship. What the hell do you think, Pulaski? And let me ask you another thing, Pulaski. If this was a human being and not an android, would you even ask that question? The answer is no! You would not. You're being prejudiced again. You're being bigoted towards Data yet again. And and then when he goes on and on, oh yes, of course, because I like the way he sort of treats her like that was a stupid question, because it was a stupid question. And he goes, yes, I've trained in this, blah, 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 I'm called in wherever see, and she interrupts and is like, oh yeah, I'm sure more than passing grade. Then why'd you fucking ask him in the first place? God damn it. Anyway, so that's not all though. They go on the shuttle. Because some people might think, oh, that's not bad. She was just checking to make sure he could fly the thing. No, I don't buy that. But even if you don't, that's not the worst of it. So they go on the shuttle, and she asks Data to examine him once she's hanging out with the kid, because she wants to make sure she's not sick. And Data says something along the lines of, "You're functioning in a full operational." Parameters, and Data is just, and her response was like, oh, well, your bedside manner sucks. And to be fair, that's not the greatest bedside manner, so I'll let her get away with that one. But then she gets the disease, and she's like in sharp pain, like she has this sharp arthritic pain. She like screams in pain and drops what she's holding, goes, ah! And she's sitting there still in pain and like wincing and could barely hold her arm up straight. And Data asks how she's doing, and she's like, oh yeah, I'm functioning in full parameters. Even when she's in pain, she goes out of her way to be a bitch to Data. I'm sorry, that was a snarky ass fucking comment. Now, she does apologize for it. To be fair to her, she does recognize, she's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be doing that. But that doesn't excuse her. She never should have said it in the first place. Like, even when she was in that much pain, she still made a point to be a dick to Data. And then when she went to the planet with Data, I can't remember anything specifically she said, but the way she was saying, oh no, don't worry about him, he's just an android. It's like, I don't know. I don't know why people would say she was being nicer to Data in this episode. She clearly was not. Anyway, so they set up this really fake narrative at the start of the episode where Picard does his captain's log, and he's like, oh, I don't know if it's captain's log. He talks to Troy, brings her in and talks to her. And it's like, oh, so what's maybe he mentions the log as well. I think it was both. But anyway, he mentions, oh, what's the deal with this new doctor that we have, even though this is the 7th episode, Picard. She's been on your ship for quite a while. If you want to examine your new doctor, maybe you should have done that several months ago when she came on board. You're a bit late to the party, my man. But anyway, he's like, so he calls Troy in and is like, so what is the deal with this new doctor? Can I trust her? She's worthy, blah, 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 and all this bullshit. And this, mind you, is before the plot kicked in that we knew that it was going to be about a virus, that it was going to be a medical situation. And so he didn't even know their mission was going to it could, in fact, have nothing to do with the doctor and not involve her at all. Yeah, it's just such a great coincidence. It just so happens he wants to test her and see if she's really good right before a mission happens that just so happens to involve her in the central role. What a nice coincidence for the episode. Anyway, and that whole thing was stupid. Anyway, and so there's this character fight between these two characters throughout the episode, Pulaski and Picard. Picard did have a nice line though, because Pulaski kept interrupting him, and he was like, Doctor, it would be nice if you did let me finish one of my sentences every once in a while, which I thought was a nice comeback. And she did keep interrupting him after this, but one time she did correct herself. It was like, I'm sorry, and called herself doing it. And then when she wants to beam the kids on board, which I was always with Picard, and he ended up being vindicated that this was the wrong thing to do. And she wanted to set up force fields, whatever. Picard is like, force fields could go down. They're not, infallible, and it's still not worth the risk. And so she comes up with the solution to put them in the shuttlecraft. And Picard at first is not, kind of iffy on it because she's still putting herself in danger. And he even points out, you have duties to the ship, but she's, gets really pissy at him, and it's like, look, I've gone out of my way to satisfy your conditions. And then he's like, okay, request granted. And then she kept arguing. It's like, but sir, and then she was, wait a second, you say granted? So that I thought was kind of funny. And then Picard acknowledges, yeah, I can see that you're going out of your way to satisfy my conditions, so I'll let you do this. And it turns out that maybe he shouldn't have. Maybe that wasn't the smartest move, and she eats crow when she goes off and, gets the disease and is about to die. And to her credit, when Picard's like, I want to beam you up anyway, we'll put you in stasis. And she's like, no, I am not going to let you make the same mistake I made. I was too arrogant. And now I'm going to die because of it, so I'm not going to let anyone else die for my arrogance. Which, to her credit, is at least she acknowledges her mistakes. But then you had this plot as while Pulaski was in the shuttle, Picard, after she got infected, Picard contacted the last ship that she served on, which was the Repulse. What a strange name for a ship. But anyway, is it a repulsive ship to serve on? Anyway, so she contacts them about it. The former captain reveals, like, oh, she really admires you, and she likes you, and she really studied your missions, and she thinks you're the best captain ever, and she purposely requested the Enterprise and refused to back down because she wanted to serve there so badly. I don't buy this. I don't like it. I don't think it fits. I think it was a kind of meant to be a sort of a heavy-handed way to be like, oh, you see, Picard, she actually secretly likes you, or whatever. And it made him, oh, I should re-examine myself. I shouldn't, how she acts around it. But the way she treated him, even before this episode, I'm sorry, but I don't buy that. I think, to me, that comes across as contrived writing that's trying to, make the audience go, oh my God, I gotta re-examine how I see things, even though how they're telling me things are now doesn't make any fucking sense or match up with what we've seen on screen at all so far. So, no. this is contrived nonsense, and I don't buy it. So, and then at the end, Picard, when he goes to beam her to try the magical transporter cure, he, O'Brien says, "Oh well, if this doesn't work, then we have to scatter her atoms into space." And Picard's like, "Well, let me be the one to operate the transporter." And then O'Brien's like, "Oh, thank God, thank you for doing this. I don't want to be the one to have to kill her." But question. Wouldn't O'Brien have a much better chance of actually doing it correctly, since he's this transporter expert and he's the one that came up with this idea in the first place? Aren't you making it more likely he's going to die by having Picard operate it? But no, I guess Picard's the super amazing man who can do everything. And I hate episodes that do this. There's a couple other times that will come up, one particular in season 3 that annoys the hell out of me. But, yeah. So anyway, of course, Picard does it correctly. She is instantly goes from being old to young, which, how exactly does that work? And then, and so then they appreciate each other. Or they even hug each other when again, I don't think this was earned at all. But anyway, let's talk about the magical transporter. This, to be fair, was not the first time. Yes, so they use a particular kind of science here, actually, with this transporter. I believe this branch of science is referred to as magic. Anyway, sorry. So this isn't the first time they used the magical transporter to instantly solve your problems, which, by the way, if the transporter can do this, then they've cured aging. Why doesn't every single person go in a transporter every year to de-age themselves for a year so that they never actually fucking age? So it's just a yearly going to the transporter, and they take a year off your life so you remain the same age physically for the rest of your life. Or, for that matter, if anyone has any disease ever going forward, which I know people do get diseases later, and they do die from it, why don't they just put them in the fucking transporter and magically remove the disease the same way they did here? But to be fair, see, that's the thing, though. Star Trek does this a lot, though. They come up with these magical cures that can, solve death. And then when they did it Into Darkness, everyone was bitching. And that felt off to me. I was like, why are you bitching at this one case where they do it when they have done this multiple times in Star Trek? Not to mention we get to Voyager 7 of 9's nanoprobes can apparently cure death as well, and they totally forgot about that. But anyway, moving past that, they've done this before in the episode Lonely Among Us, which is an episode I hated, and I called it out, the transporter magic that they used there to beam Picard's molecules from a nebula in space back into the Enterprise, which went into the ship's computer and made a P for Picard. That was so stupid! Anyway, it made a P for Picard, and he managed to beam him from the computer and back into, materialize his human physical form out of nothing, out of just the transporter memory, and beam him back into existence. And that was bullshit. And people involved with this show later on, with the technical side of thing, like Mike Okada, would be on the record saying that is bullshit. And so they have done it before, similar to that, but it was terrible when they did it that time, and it's terrible when they do it this time. Granted, it maybe not quite as bad because they didn't transport him out of nothing. But in that instance, at least with Picard, he had no memory of what happened after he beamed him over, which actually kind of makes sense because they used his transporter record from before he beamed out. So it kind of makes sense that he wouldn't remember the interim. and it would only remember since the last record that they used him for. So it should have been the same with Pulaski, though. She should have had no memory of the past, like through however long it had been since she brushed her hair or whatever. And also, I watched this podcast recently where they had a science advisor talking about this episode, scientist, and he was saying it didn't make sense why Pulaski didn't beam back as a giant hair follicle because they used the hair follicle. How does that tell her entire genetic makeup? But anyway, magic. So that whole thing was really stupid. To be fair. Now, another thing I want to talk about with this episode is the start where the Enterprise goes to the God, I can't remember the name. Is it the Tripoli or I think it's the Tripoli or the Gentry or some sort of ship. The ship that had like 26 people on it that they all turned old and died. Whatever the hell that ship was called. They went there and found that they weren't answering their calls. They received this garbled message for help. They were like, "Help, I'm dying," and couldn't figure out what it was. And they go there, and the ship's still moving, but there seems to be no motion for it. They don't answer their calls. They don't know what's going on, and so Picard's. Oh, the Lantry, sorry, not the Gentry. That's the character from Game of Thrones. Or the Tripoli, that's anything. The Lantry. Anyway, so when they go to the Lantry and something's weird and they don't know what's going on, don't send an away team aboard. I think Riker even suggested, and Picard's like, no, we got to figure out what's going on first. So he links, does a network linking to the ship where he puts in this, captain's code. He has to go in his ready room to be alone to do it so no one else hears his code, which actually makes a lot of sense. Because at first I was like, why is he going alone to do this? But then it actually makes sense that only a captain should be able to do this. So he goes in his ready room, puts in his captain's code, and then Geordi and Data use it to link up with the other ships. And now they're networked together so they can control that entire ship from the Enterprise. They can even use the internal medical scanners to scan the people on the bridge, and they link the view screens so that they can see a picture of the bridge from on their view screen. And that's a very interesting concept. And so there they figure out that that they died of old age and there's this virus on board, and he absolutely shouldn't be on board because they would get it. So that's actually very smart and a very, great way to operate. It's also the concept of networking ships is actually really makes a lot of sense. And it would come in handy in certain situations, and you think it would require a high-up code from, say, someone like Picard, who is the captain of the flagship. And I think it would make total sense that he would be able to take control of a small passenger or freight transport ship, which only 26 people, where he's the captain of a flagship that has over 1,000 people. So that makes absolute sense. In fact, a very smart policy to have, but it never comes into play ever again. At least not to my knowledge. I don't think they ever used it. I was a bit reminded of the whole thing from Star Trek II, where once Kirk had the correct code over the line, he was ordered to go into their ship in order to lower their shields and override their internal things. But that's a bit different than this. So I think this was very smart. But here's my main point, though. This is the smart thing to do, to not just beam people on board willy-nilly, to actually be like, no, this is a weird situation. We don't know what's going on. Let's try to get more information before we just beam aboard. But the problem with that, even though it's much smarter and is the correct thing to do and it makes so much sense, the problem with it is that is not what they would normally do. Not just before this episode, but also after this episode. If they go to a ship and they say, oh my God, what's going on? We'd have no idea what's wrong with it. It's like destroyed or derelict or not responding. It's a mystery. The first thing they do is beam an away team on board. They do that every time. They did that in Naked Now, and that caused them to get a virus that nearly destroyed the ship. And they do that in other various episodes, but they just so happen to not do it in this episode. Why? Because the plot and the writer knew that they would get the virus that they would beam on board. But many other episodes, they just beam straight on board. It just so happens that the plot knows that they're not going to get a virus because there's something else affecting the ship, and it's okay, it's safe for them to be on board, so they can just go straight to being on board before trying to figure out what was wrong with the ship. The writer knew, or the plot knows, that they shouldn't be on board, and so they actually do the smart thing, which they never do the smart thing in all the other situations. They just willy-nilly just beam people on board where they could just easily die of a virus. And to be fair, that's also what they did on the original series. They would also beam willy-nilly on board where they could just die from a virus. No protective suits or anything, just let's beam right aboard where we could just get this virus and kill my entire crew. But good thing the writer was there to preempt them and tell them not to do it. Because the writer knew there was a virus on board the ship. Contrived writing, that's what I'm getting at. Even though this is probably what they should do the whole time. But they don't. They don't. Anyway. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about this them there episode. So I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for for supporting me on Patreon. Is very much appreciated. It does really help me. It means a lot to me personally. As a matter of fact, just the not even the money or whatever, just the knowing that you're willing to support me in what I do and that you like what I do. It really helps me continue, and I am very thankful for that. So we have Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Michelaccio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neilhouse. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, we have a few Patreon comments for this episode, if I can find them. Let's see. Okay, so we have one comment from Norman Buchwald who says, so here's the rare Pulaski episode, and I have to admit it's interesting. Granted, Pulaski's tough determination to handle things without getting full understanding almost killed her. Lore runners surmise this may have been an excellent exit episode for the character if she had just gotten old and died, and could have had a plus with the resolution with Data, considering after her exit this season, minus one direct mention and another indirect mention is never heard of again unless you count a ship named after her in the third season of Picard. As it is, it's okay, but once again, we have scientists not respecting Federation laws and ended up almost getting themselves killed with their stubbornness, while once again being a colony that is not helping themselves by being evasive with Starfleet to meet one of the rare examples of Roddenberry's approved rule of conflict. Worf is still underdeveloped and makes me wonder how he passed the Academy with the "it's a trick" comment when accelerated age plastic wrapped kid was beamed over. Still, I'll give it credit for being better than the average even making for the first time yet in the series as the series has the audience member be a bit sympathetic with the elderly Pulaski. Still, the transporter solution was not only too easy, but makes one wonder why no diseased character or other can simply be saved in the future. I mean, get Picard from the transporter buffer before he was Borgified. Check to see if any remnant of Tasha Yar is still around on the ship. Bring her back. Anyway, I'm torn between a 6 and a 7, but the more I think of the problems this episode, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. So you bring up Worf, which is a good point. That scene where he went, "It's a trick!" And it wasn't just Worf, to be fair. It was also Geordi who started being like, "Oh, beam it back!" And freaking out. And Picard's like, chill the fuck out. And they were doing this just because they said it was a 12-year-old child, and what they beamed aboard was clearly an adult male in his at least 20s. But just because of that, they're gonna freak out and be like, "It's a trick, beam it back." That is very immature and irresponsible behavior from professionals. But the other thing about Worf that I wanted to bring up that I really noticed is in an earlier scene where in the ready room and Pulaski was arguing to beam the child aboard. And Picard was against it because it was a risk. And Worf spoke up against that. He's like, "It's a security risk." And he's correct. That is, not necessarily security, but a medical risk at least, that could cause a quarantine break, and it's not worth the risk. But Pulaski keeps arguing with Picard and then comes up with the idea to put it in plastic, and then Picard agrees. And then you have this great scene right after Picard okays the plan to beam up the kid. They show Worf, they go to Worf, and he rolls his eyes big time. He's like, "Oh, God, whatever." I'm sorry, is he 12? I mean, it's kind of funny, but that's kind of really out of character. Like, he is the security chief of the Enterprise. The fact, just because he didn't get his way, and I do know that Worf gets really irritated because he always wants to be err on the side of caution, but usually when Picard overrules him, he's like, "Okay, well, I said my piece, but the captain ruled, so I'll go with it." The fact that he rolls his eyes about it is like, "Oh, God, morons," was stupid. I'm sorry. He's not a 12-year-old. He shouldn't be rolling his eyes just because he got overruled in something like this. That was a bit dumb. I mean, they went out of their way to get a close-up of Michael Dorn, have him roll his eyes, and then have that shot and edit it into the actual episode, so it kept there. Now, to be fair, maybe they did the entire scene, because sometimes they do the entire scene on a close-up of Michael Dorn just listening in order so they can use it for reaction shots. So maybe they did the entire scene on Michael Dorn, and then at the end of it, when they said when Picard okayed the plan, he rolled his eyes, and maybe that was Michael Dorn improvising. Maybe that wasn't in the script. But why include it in the episode? Maybe they just thought it was funny. Oh, look at this funny take of Michael Dorn rolling his eyes. Let's put that in the episode. No, it makes Worf seem like a 14-year-old. You shouldn't put that in the episode, no matter how funny it might look. But that is just my humble opinion. Anyway, my rating for Unnatural Selection, out of 10... I'm teetering between a 5 and a 6. I'm not even sure which way to go with this. It's definitely right down that middle of being okay. I think I'm going to actually go back to a 5. Yeah, I'm going to give it a 5 average because of the magic they use at the transporter. I think that's what slightly tips this from a 5 to a 6. Overall, this episode is just fine. It doesn't totally suck. It's not like a terrible episode. It kept my interest. This is a bit engaging. The character story for Picard and Pulaski is somewhat interesting, even though I think it's kind of manufactured, not handled the best. But it's also not that great either. The arrogance of the scientists kind of annoy me, and the whole plot being about, oh, do we save Pulaski or not, and her being reckless and treating Data like shit, bothers me. And of course, the biggest thing that bothers me is the magical transporter ending. The magic to solve everything, which makes no sense. But yeah, 5 out of 10, not a terrible episode. So that is it for my review of Unnatural Selection. And by the way, I think this episode's better than The Deadly Years, which I gave a 3 to. Because that episode was just annoying with Kirk being like, oh, I should be in command. At least it didn't go that route, so at least it's better than that episode. So anyway, coming up next on my channel tomorrow, Thursday, I will be releasing my revisited of getting ahead of myself. My revisited for A Matter of Honor, which will be over on my Patreon page for my Patreon supporters, where I revisit my review of A Matter of Honor and give my updated thoughts and maybe some other thoughts on the episode I wasn't able to include in my original review. And then on Saturday, still on Patreon, this time for The Measure of a Man revisited. So I'll revisit my review for The Measure of a Man. Very, very popular episode. So I'll give my thoughts again, my updated thoughts on this episode. And so that's also over on Patreon for Patreon supporters. Then on Monday, I will be back on my main channel with another public video for the Dolphin, or however the hell you pronounce it. I always said dolphin, but there's no L in it, so it's like Dolphin or whatever. The one with Wesley having a teen romance with the shapeshifter. So that will be on Monday. And then on Wednesday, another new review with Contagion. Looking forward to that episode. So that will be what's coming up on my channel. So be sure to check out my channel for that and many other videos and many other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.